Ellie Weik woke up every morning at 6:30, just like she had for the past 3 years. Her small apartment on Oak Street was quiet and peaceful. She loved the way the morning sun came through her bedroom window and lit up the white walls. Ellie was 28 years old and had the kind of smile that made everyone around her feel happy. She worked as a third-grade teacher at Millbrook Elementary School in Ohio. The children loved her because she made learning fun. She would bring her guitar to class and teach them songs about math and reading. Her classroom walls were covered with colorful drawings that her students made for her. Other teachers often asked Ellie for advice because she was so good with difficult children. Ellie had grown up in Millbrook. It was a small town where everyone knew everyone. There were only 15,000 people living there. The main street had a few shops, a diner, and an old movie theater. Most people worked at the factory outside of town or drove 30 minutes to the bigger city for their jobs. Her parents, Tom and Carol Weik, still lived in the same house where Ellie grew up. It was a blue house with a white fence around the yard. Tom worked at the post office for 30 years before he retired. Carol was a nurse at the local hospital. They were proud of their daughter and how she turned out. Ellie visited them every Sunday for dinner. Ellie had been dating Michael Torres for 4 years. They met at a coffee shop downtown when Ellie was grading papers and Michael was reading a book about cars. He worked as a mechanic at his uncle's garage. Michael was 30 years old, tall with dark hair and kind eyes. He was quiet but funny when you got to know him. 6 months before everything changed, Michael asked Ellie to marry him. It happened on a Saturday evening in October. They were walking in the park near the lake when Michael got down on one knee. The ring was simple but beautiful. Ellie said yes right away and hugged him so tight that they both started crying happy tears. After they got engaged, Ellie and Michael started planning their wedding. They wanted something small with just their families and close friends. Ellie picked out a white dress from a shop in the next town over. Michael ordered a dark blue suit. They planned to get married in June at the small church where Ellie's family went every Sunday. Ellie's best friend was Jessica Martinez. They had known each other since high school. Jessica worked at the bank downtown and lived in an apartment 2 blocks away from Ellie. Every Friday night they would have dinner together. Sometimes they cooked at one of their apartments. Other times they went to Tony's Diner on Main Street. Jessica and Ellie talked about everything. They shared secrets and dreams. Jessica was excited about being the maid of honor at Ellie's wedding. She helped Ellie pick out decorations and plan the menu. The two friends spent hours looking at wedding magazines and talking about what kind of flowers to use. Besides teaching and planning her wedding, Ellie spent her free time helping at the animal shelter. She had been volunteering there for 2 years. Every Saturday morning, she would go there to walk the dogs and play with the cats. The shelter workers loved having Ellie around because she was so gentle with the scared animals. Ellie had adopted a small orange cat from the shelter. She named him Rusty because of his color. Rusty followed Ellie around the apartment and slept on her bed every night. He was friendly and loved when people came to visit. The people in Millbrook really liked Ellie. She was the kind of person who remembered everyone's name and asked about their families. When she went to the grocery store, she always stopped to talk to people she knew. Mrs. Johnson from down the street said, Ellie was like sunshine on a cloudy day. At school, Ellie was known for staying late to help students who were having trouble with their work. She never made any child feel bad for not understanding something right away. The principal, Mrs. Linda Foster, thought Ellie was one of the best teachers they had ever had. Ellie's daily routine was very simple. She woke up early, made coffee, and got ready for work. She drove her small red car to school and arrived by 7:15. After school, she would either go to the grocery store, visit her parents, or meet Jessica for coffee. In the evenings, she graded papers, watched TV, or talked on the phone with Michael. On weekends, Ellie liked to clean her apartment and do laundry. She would make a big breakfast and read books. Sometimes Michael came over and they would watch movies together. Other times she went shopping with Jessica or visited the animal shelter. Ellie was saving money for her wedding and for the house that she and Michael wanted to buy. She was careful with her spending and kept track of every dollar. She wanted to have a nice home where they could raise children someday. Everyone who knew Ellie thought she had a perfect life. She had a job she loved, a man who cared about her, and good friends and family. She was healthy and happy. She made other people smile and feel good about themselves. But even in small towns like Millbrook, bad things can happen to good people. Nobody knew that someone was watching Ellie. Nobody knew that her perfect life was about to end in the worst way possible. March was starting to get warmer after a cold winter. Ellie was excited about spring coming. She had started planning her small garden and looking forward to the wedding in June. She bought new curtains for her apartment and was thinking about painting the kitchen a light yellow color. On March 14th, Ellie had a normal day at school. She taught her students about fractions using pizza slices made of paper. After school, she stopped at the store to buy groceries for the week. She came home, fed Rusty, and made dinner. She talked to Michael on the phone for an hour about their wedding plans. That night, Ellie went to bed early because she was tired. She had no idea that this would be her last normal day. She had no idea that someone had been planning to hurt her. She fell asleep feeling happy and safe in her small apartment, not knowing that danger was very close. Friday, March 15th, started like any other day in Millbrook. The sun was shining and people were going about their normal business. Nobody knew that this day would change everything for the small town forever. Jessica Martinez finished her work at the bank at 5 o'clock. She was looking forward to her weekly dinner with Ellie. They had been doing this every Friday for 3 years. It was their special time to catch up and talk about their week. Jessica drove to her apartment first to change clothes. She put on jeans and a comfortable sweater. She was excited to hear about Ellie's wedding plans. They had been looking at different ideas for the cake, and Jessica wanted to know what Ellie had decided. At 6:30, Jessica called Ellie to ask where they should meet for dinner. Usually, Ellie answered her phone right away. But this time, the phone just kept ringing. After 5 rings, it went to voicemail. Jessica thought this was strange because Ellie always answered when she called. Jessica left a message saying she was ready to go to dinner and asked Ellie to call her back. She waited for 10 minutes, but Ellie did not call. Jessica tried calling again but got the same result. The phone rang and went to voicemail. Now Jessica was starting to worry. Ellie was never late, and she always called if something came up. Jessica decided to drive to Ellie's apartment on Oak Street. Maybe Ellie was in the shower and could not hear her phone. The drive to Ellie's apartment took only 5 minutes. Jessica parked her car in front of the small apartment building. It was a 2-story building with 4 apartments. Ellie lived in apartment number 2 on the first floor. Jessica had been there hundreds of times before. Jessica walked up to Ellie's front door and knocked 3 times. She waited, but nobody answered. She knocked again, this time louder. Still no answer. Jessica called out Ellie's name but heard nothing from inside the apartment. That was when Jessica noticed something very wrong. The front door was not completely closed. There was a small gap where the door had not shut all the way. Jessica knew that Ellie would never leave her door open like this. Ellie was always very careful about locking her door. Jessica felt her heart start to beat faster. She pushed the door open a little bit and called out Ellie's name again. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Jessica could not even hear the television or any other sounds that would mean someone was home. She pushed the door open more and stepped inside. The living room looked normal. Ellie's couch was in its usual place with the blue pillows arranged neatly. The coffee table had some wedding magazines on it. Everything looked the way it always did. Jessica walked toward the kitchen. She could see Ellie's purse sitting on the counter next to the coffee maker. Her car keys were on the dining table where she always put them. This made Jessica even more worried because if Ellie had gone somewhere, she would have taken her purse and keys. Jessica called out for Ellie again, but her voice sounded scared now. She walked through the small living room toward the bedroom. The hallway was dark because the sun was starting to set outside. As Jessica got closer to the bedroom, she noticed that Ellie's orange cat, Rusty, was hiding under the dining table. This was strange because Rusty was usually friendly and would come say hello when someone visited. Instead, the cat looked scared and would not come out. Jessica reached the bedroom door, which was halfway open. She pushed it open all the way and looked inside. At first, she did not see anything unusual. The bed was made and everything looked tidy, just like Ellie always kept it. But then Jessica looked down at the floor on the other side of the bed. What she saw made her scream so loud that the neighbors could hear her through the walls. Ellie was lying on the bedroom floor. She was not moving. There was blood on her clothes and on the carpet around her. Jessica could tell right away that something terrible had happened to her best friend. Jessica's hands started shaking so badly that she could barely hold her phone. She dialed 911 as fast as she could. Her voice was shaking when the operator answered. The operator asked Jessica to stay calm and tell her what was wrong. Jessica tried to explain that she had found her friend hurt in her apartment. The operator asked if Ellie was breathing. Jessica was too scared to get close enough to check. The operator told Jessica to stay on the phone and not to touch anything in the apartment. She said police and an ambulance were on their way. Jessica stood in the doorway of the bedroom, afraid to go in but also afraid to leave Ellie alone. While Jessica waited for help to arrive, she looked around the bedroom more carefully. She could see that some things were not in their usual places. A lamp had been knocked over. Some of Ellie's jewelry was missing from the dresser where she always kept it. The minutes felt like hours as Jessica waited. She kept talking to the operator who tried to keep her calm. Jessica could not stop looking at her friend lying on the floor. She kept hoping that Ellie would wake up and everything would be okay. Finally, Jessica heard sirens getting closer. She heard car doors slamming outside and people running up the stairs to the apartment building. Jessica ran to the front door to meet the police and paramedics. The first police officer through the door was Detective Robert Chen. He was a man in his 40s who had worked on many difficult cases in the bigger city before coming to Millbrook. He took one look at Jessica's face and knew this was serious. Detective Chen asked Jessica to wait outside while he and the paramedics went into the bedroom. Jessica sat on the steps outside the building and cried. Other neighbors started coming out of their apartments to see what was happening. After what seemed like forever, Detective Chen came outside to talk to Jessica. His face was very serious. He told Jessica that Ellie was dead and that this was now a murder investigation. The word murder hit Jessica like a punch in the stomach. She could not believe that someone had killed her best friend. Not in Millbrook. Not Ellie. She was the kindest person Jessica knew. Who would want to hurt her? As more police cars arrived and the apartment building filled with investigators, Jessica realized that nothing would ever be the same again. Her best friend was gone forever, and someone in their safe little town was a killer. Detective Robert Chen had seen many crime scenes in his 15 years as a police officer, but finding a murder victim in the quiet town of Millbrook was something new. He had moved here 2 years ago because he wanted to work somewhere peaceful. Now he was looking at the worst kind of crime right in front of him. Chen was 43 years old with gray hair at his temples. He was known for being very careful and thorough with his investigations. He never rushed to conclusions and always looked at every piece of evidence. The other officers respected him because he solved cases that seemed impossible. The first thing Chen did was secure the crime scene. He made sure no one except the forensics team could enter Ellie's apartment. He ordered his officers to start talking to all the neighbors in the building. Someone might have seen or heard something important. The medical examiner arrived at 7:30 that evening. Dr. Sarah Williams was a woman in her 50s who had worked on hundreds of murder cases. She examined Ellie's body carefully while Chen watched and took notes. Dr. Williams told Chen that Ellie had been stabbed multiple times in the chest and stomach. She had also been hit on the head with something heavy. The attack was brutal and personal. Someone had been very angry when they killed Ellie. The time of death was between noon and 2 o'clock that afternoon. This meant Ellie had been killed during her lunch break from school. Chen wondered why she had come home in the middle of the day. Teachers usually stayed at school until late afternoon. Chen called the elementary school and spoke to Principal Linda Foster. She told him that Ellie had asked to leave early because she said she was not feeling well. Ellie left school at 11:30 that morning. This was unusual because Ellie never missed work unless she was really sick. The next step was to interview the people closest to Ellie. Chen started with her fiancé, Michael Torres. He called Michael and asked him to come to the police station. Michael arrived 30 minutes later looking confused and worried. When Chen told Michael that Ellie was dead, Michael's reaction surprised him. Instead of crying or getting upset, Michael just sat there quietly. His face showed shock, but not the kind of deep sadness Chen expected from someone who had just lost the woman he loved. Chen asked Michael where he had been that day. Michael said he was working at his uncle's garage until noon. Then he went to his brother's house to help fix a broken fence. His brother Jake Torres confirmed this story. Jake said Michael had been at his house from 12:30 until 6 o'clock. Chen made notes about Michael's alibi. The timing was important because Ellie was killed between noon and 2 o'clock. If Michael was really at his brother's house by 12:30, he could not have killed Ellie. But Chen still found Michael's calm reaction strange. The forensics team found several important clues in Ellie's apartment. There were no signs of forced entry, which meant Ellie had let her killer inside. This suggested she knew the person who killed her. The killer had also been careful not to leave fingerprints on anything obvious. However, the team did find something interesting. Ellie's jewelry box had been emptied, and several expensive pieces were missing. Her engagement ring was still on her finger, but a gold necklace and matching earrings that her grandmother had given her were gone. Chen wondered if this was a robbery that went wrong, or if the killer took the jewelry to make it look like a robbery. The fact that they left the expensive engagement ring made Chen think the robbery was fake. The next person Chen interviewed was Jessica Martinez. She was still very upset and could barely talk without crying. Chen was gentle with her because he could see she was suffering from the shock of finding her best friend's body. Jessica told Chen that Ellie had seemed normal all week. They had talked on Wednesday about the wedding plans, and Ellie was excited and happy. Jessica could not think of anyone who would want to hurt Ellie. Everyone loved her. But then Jessica remembered something important. She told Chen that 2 weeks ago Ellie had mentioned feeling uncomfortable at school. There was a parent who had been causing problems. His name was David Walsh, and he was angry about his son's grades. Chen asked Jessica to tell him more about David Walsh. Jessica said that Ellie had told her about several meetings with Walsh where he became very aggressive. He blamed Ellie for his son's poor performance in school and accused her of being unfair. Chen decided to visit the school the next morning to learn more about David Walsh. He also wanted to talk to other teachers who might know about problems between parents and Ellie. That night, Chen stayed late at the police station reviewing all the evidence. He made a list of possible suspects. Michael Torres was at the top of the list, even though he had an alibi. Husbands and boyfriends were often the killers in cases like this. David Walsh was also on the list. Chen had learned over the years that angry parents could become dangerous when they blamed teachers for their children's problems. Chen also considered the possibility that this was a random crime. Maybe someone had broken in to rob Ellie and killed her when she came home unexpectedly. But this seemed less likely because there were no signs of forced entry. The forensics team worked through the night processing evidence from the apartment. They found several fibers that did not belong to Ellie or anyone who was supposed to be in her apartment. These fibers were dark blue, like from a work shirt or jacket. They also found something else that was very important. The security system in Ellie's apartment building had been turned off between 11:45 and 2:15 that day. Someone had either hacked the system or convinced the building manager to turn it off. Chen made a note to interview the building manager first thing in the morning. He also wanted to check if there were any security cameras on nearby buildings that might have recorded who entered or left Ellie's building that day. As Chen drove home that night, he thought about Ellie's life and death. She seemed to be a good person who cared about children and helped animals at the shelter. She was planning a wedding and had a bright future ahead of her. Someone had taken all of that away from her in a few violent minutes. Chen promised himself that he would find Ellie's killer and make sure they paid for what they had done. The investigation was just beginning, but Chen already knew this case would be one of the most important of his career. In a small town like Millbrook, everyone would be watching to see if the police could solve this terrible crime and bring justice for Ellie Weik. Detective Chen arrived at his office early Saturday morning with coffee and a determined mind. The murder of Ellie Weik was all anyone in Millbrook could talk about. People were scared and wanted answers. Chen knew he had to work fast to find the killer before panic took over the town. The first thing Chen did was call the phone company. He requested all of Ellie's phone records for the past 3 months. He wanted to see who she had been talking to and if there were any strange calls or messages. While he waited for the phone records, Chen drove to Millbrook Elementary School to meet with Principal Linda Foster. The school was closed for the weekend, but Foster had agreed to meet him there to discuss Ellie and the problem parent David Walsh. Linda Foster was a woman in her late 50s who had been running the school for 12 years. She had gray hair, pulled back in a neat bun, and wore glasses. Chen could tell she was very upset about losing one of her teachers. Foster told Chen that Ellie was one of the best teachers she had ever hired. Children loved her and other teachers looked up to her. She never had discipline problems in her classroom and parents usually praised her work. But David Walsh was different. His son Tommy was 8 years old and struggling in school. Tommy had trouble reading and often did not turn in his homework. Ellie had tried many different ways to help him, but Tommy continued to fall behind. Foster explained that she had been present for 2 meetings between Ellie and David Walsh. In the first meeting, Walsh was frustrated but polite. He wanted to know why his son was getting poor grades. Ellie explained that Tommy needed extra help and suggested having him tested for learning problems. Walsh became angry at this suggestion. He said there was nothing wrong with his son and blamed Ellie for not teaching properly. He accused her of picking on Tommy because she did not like him. The second meeting was much worse. Walsh arrived angry and started yelling at Ellie before she could even speak. He accused her of ruining his son's education and said she should not be allowed to teach children. Foster had to ask Walsh to leave when he started using bad language and making threats. She told Chen that Walsh had said he would make sure Ellie paid for what she was doing to his family. After the second meeting, Foster had banned Walsh from coming to the school without an appointment. She also made a note in his file about his threatening behavior. She wished now that she had called the police about the threats. Chen asked Foster for David Walsh's address and phone number. She gave him the information and also provided the contact details for other parents who might have witnessed Walsh's behavior. When Chen returned to the police station, the phone records were waiting for him. As he looked through them, he found something very disturbing. In the 3 weeks before her death, Ellie had received 47 calls from the same unknown number. Most of these calls were made late at night or early in the morning. The calls usually lasted less than 30 seconds, which suggested the caller was hanging up when Ellie answered, or letting the phone ring, and then hanging up. Chen traced the phone number and discovered it belonged to a prepaid cell phone bought with cash at a store in the next town over. There was no way to identify who had bought the phone, but the pattern of calls showed someone was harassing Ellie. Even more interesting was what Chen found in Ellie's text messages. Starting 6 weeks before her death, she had been receiving threatening messages from the same unknown number. The messages were short but scary. The first message said, "I am watching you." The second one said, "You will pay for what you did." Other messages described Ellie's daily activities, like what she wore to work or where she went shopping. The messages showed that someone had been following Ellie and keeping track of her movements. The last message was sent on Thursday night, just 1 day before she was killed. It said, "Tomorrow you get what you deserve." Chen felt his stomach turn as he read these messages. Ellie must have been terrified, but she had not reported the harassment to police. Chen wondered why she had kept this secret from everyone, including her best friend Jessica. Chen decided to visit Jessica Martinez again to ask if Ellie had mentioned being scared or followed. Jessica lived in a small apartment above the flower shop on Main Street. When Chen knocked on her door, Jessica looked like she had not slept all night. Jessica invited Chen inside and made coffee for both of them. Chen showed her copies of the threatening text messages and asked if Ellie had ever mentioned receiving them. Jessica was shocked. She said Ellie had never told her about any threatening messages or phone calls. But now that Chen mentioned it, Jessica remembered that Ellie had seemed nervous and distracted over the past few weeks. Jessica told Chen that Ellie had been checking her phone constantly and looking over her shoulder when they walked downtown. She had also started keeping her curtains closed at home, which was unusual because Ellie loved natural light. 2 weeks ago, Ellie had asked Jessica strange questions about whether she thought someone could break into her apartment easily. Jessica had laughed and told her she was being paranoid. Now Jessica felt terrible for not taking Ellie's concerns seriously. Chen asked Jessica if Ellie had mentioned David Walsh or any problems with parents at school. Jessica said Ellie had talked about a difficult parent but did not go into details. Ellie tried not to bring work problems home with her. After leaving Jessica's apartment, Chen drove to the address Principal Foster had given him for David Walsh. The house was in an older part of town where the houses were small and close together. Walsh's house needed paint and the yard was full of weeds. Chen knocked on the front door and a woman answered. She was thin with brown hair and looked tired. She introduced herself as Karen Walsh, David's wife. Chen asked if her husband was home. Karen told Chen that David was at work. He had a job at the construction site outside of town and would not be home until 6 o'clock. Chen asked if he could come back later to speak with David. Karen seemed nervous when Chen mentioned that this was about Ellie Weik's murder. She said she had heard about the teacher's death on the news and thought it was terrible. But Chen noticed that she would not look him in the eyes when she spoke. Chen asked Karen if her husband had mentioned having problems with Tommy's teacher. Karen said that David was frustrated about Tommy's grades, but she tried to stay out of school issues. As Chen was leaving, he noticed something important in the driveway. There was a dark blue pickup truck parked next to an old sedan. The truck had mud on the tires and some scratches on the passenger side. Chen remembered that witnesses had reported seeing a dark blue vehicle parked near Ellie's apartment building in the weeks before her death. He made a note to check if Walsh's truck matched the descriptions given by witnesses. Chen also noticed that there were work clothes hanging on a line in the backyard. Several shirts and a jacket were dark blue, similar to the fibers found in Ellie's apartment. That evening, Chen returned to David Walsh's house at 6:30. This time, Walsh was home. He was a big man with thick arms and rough hands from his construction job. He had short brown hair and small eyes that seemed angry even when he was not upset. Walsh invited Chen inside but did not seem happy about the visit. The house was messy and smelled like cigarettes. Tommy Walsh was sitting at the kitchen table, doing homework while his mother cooked dinner. Chen asked Walsh about his relationship with Ellie Weik. Walsh immediately became defensive. He said that Ellie was a terrible teacher who did not care about helping children learn. He blamed her for Tommy's poor grades and said she had it out for his family. When Chen asked Walsh where he was on Friday between noon and 2 o'clock, Walsh said he was working at the construction site. But when Chen pressed for details, Walsh's story started to change. First, Walsh said he worked all day without taking a break. Then he said he had taken lunch at noon but stayed at the job site. Finally, he admitted that he had left work early on Friday but claimed he went home to rest because he was not feeling well. Chen asked Karen Walsh to confirm her husband's story. Karen looked uncomfortable and said she had not been home Friday afternoon because she was visiting her sister in the next town. As Chen prepared to leave, he noticed something else important. On a table near the front door, there was a collection of jewelry. Chen recognized a gold necklace and matching earrings that looked exactly like the items missing from Ellie's apartment. When Chen asked about the jewelry, Walsh said it belonged to his wife. But Karen looked surprised and confused. She started to say something, but Walsh gave her a sharp look that made her stop talking. Chen knew he was getting close to solving Ellie's murder. All the evidence was pointing to David Walsh, but he needed more proof before he could make an arrest. The investigation was about to take a dramatic turn. Sunday morning brought Detective Chen the phone call that would change everything. He was at home drinking coffee and reviewing his notes when his phone rang. The caller was Patricia Bell, a substitute teacher who worked at Millbrook Elementary School. Patricia was 60 years old and had been substitute teaching for 15 years. She had a reputation for being very observant and remembering details. When she called Chen, her voice was shaky but determined. Patricia told Chen that she had been afraid to call earlier because she was not sure if what she saw was important. But after thinking about it all weekend, she decided she had to speak up. She had witnessed something 3 days before Ellie's murder that now seemed very significant. On Tuesday afternoon, Patricia had been leaving the school around 4 o'clock when she saw Ellie and a man having a heated argument in the parking lot. The man was tall and heavy with brown hair. He was pointing his finger at Ellie and speaking in a loud, angry voice. Patricia could not hear everything they were saying because she was too far away, but she heard the man say something about making Ellie pay and that she would be sorry. Ellie looked scared and kept backing away from the man toward her car. Patricia had seen David Walsh at school meetings before and was certain that he was the man arguing with Ellie. She said Walsh looked very angry and was making threatening gestures with his hands. The argument lasted about 5 minutes before Ellie got in her car and drove away quickly. Walsh stood in the parking lot watching her leave, and Patricia said his expression was frightening. She had never seen someone look so full of hate. Chen thanked Patricia for calling and asked her to come to the police station that afternoon to make an official statement. This was exactly the kind of evidence he needed to build a case against David Walsh. After Patricia hung up, Chen immediately called his forensics team. He wanted them to get a search warrant for Walsh's house and truck. With Patricia's testimony about the threatening confrontation, plus the suspicious jewelry and Walsh's changing alibi, Chen had enough evidence to convince a judge. By Sunday evening, Chen had the search warrant. He decided to execute it first thing Monday morning when Walsh would be at work. This would give the forensics team time to search thoroughly without interference. Monday morning at 8 o'clock, Chen and 4 other officers arrived at the Walsh house. Karen Walsh was home alone with Tommy, who was getting ready for school. Chen showed her the search warrant and explained that they needed to search the house and David's truck. Karen looked terrified but did not try to stop them. She took Tommy to a neighbor's house so he would not have to see the police going through their belongings. Chen could tell that Karen knew more than she had admitted about her husband's activities. The forensics team started with David's truck. In the back of the pickup, they found several important pieces of evidence. There were fibers that matched the carpet in Ellie's apartment. There was also a small spot of blood on the tailgate that appeared to have been cleaned, but not completely removed. Inside the house, the team found even more evidence. In David's bedroom closet, they discovered a dark blue work shirt with what looked like bloodstains on the sleeve. The shirt also had fibers that matched the ones found in Ellie's apartment, but the most damaging evidence was found in the garage. Hidden behind some paint cans, officers found a plastic bag containing several pieces of jewelry. The gold necklace and earrings that Chen had seen on Friday night were in the bag, along with 2 gold bracelets and a small diamond ring. Chen called Jessica Martinez and asked her to come to the police station to identify the jewelry. Jessica immediately recognized the necklace and earrings as the ones Ellie's grandmother had given her. She had seen Ellie wear them many times. Jessica also identified one of the bracelets as a gift that Michael Torres had given Ellie for her birthday last year. The jewelry was definitely stolen from Ellie's apartment during the murder. With this physical evidence, plus Patricia Bell's testimony about the parking lot confrontation, Chen felt he had enough to arrest David Walsh. He called the construction site and asked the foreman to keep Walsh there until police arrived. Walsh was arrested at his job site at 2 o'clock Monday afternoon. Chen read him his rights and transported him to the police station for questioning. Walsh remained silent during the ride and asked for a lawyer as soon as they arrived. While they waited for Walsh's lawyer to arrive, Chen interviewed Karen Walsh again. This time she was ready to tell the truth. She admitted that she had been afraid of her husband for months and knew he had an unhealthy obsession with blaming others for Tommy's problems. Karen told Chen that David had been talking about Ellie Weik constantly for weeks. He blamed her for everything wrong in Tommy's life and said she was deliberately trying to make their son fail. David had become so angry about the situation that he could barely sleep at night. Karen revealed that David had been driving by Ellie's apartment building and following her around town. She had begged him to stop, but he said he needed to keep an eye on her to protect Tommy from her evil influence. On Friday morning, David had left for work as usual, but came home around noon saying he felt sick. Karen was not there because she had gone to visit her sister, just as she had told Chen. But when she returned home that evening, David was acting very strangely. He had taken a shower and changed clothes, which was unusual because he normally waited until after dinner to clean up from work. His work clothes were missing, and when Karen asked about them, David said he had thrown them away because they were ruined. Karen also noticed that David had some scratches on his hands and arms that had not been there when he left for work that morning. When she asked about the injuries, David said he had fallen at the construction site. The most frightening thing Karen remembered was how David had acted that Friday night. Instead of being upset about the teacher's murder like everyone else in town, David seemed almost happy. He kept saying that some people got what they deserved. Chen realized that Karen Walsh had been living with a dangerous man who was capable of murder. He arranged for her and Tommy to stay with Karen's sister until David could be properly charged and the immediate danger was over. When David Walsh's lawyer arrived, Chen was ready with overwhelming evidence. The forensics report showed that the blood on Walsh's truck and shirt was a match for Ellie's blood type. The fibers found in his truck and house were identical to those found in Ellie's apartment. The stolen jewelry sealed the case. There was no way Walsh could explain having Ellie's personal belongings in his garage unless he had taken them from her apartment during the murder. Patricia Bell's testimony about the parking lot argument showed that Walsh had been escalating his threats against Ellie in the days before her death. Combined with the harassing phone calls and text messages from the untraceable phone, Chen could prove that Walsh had been stalking Ellie for weeks. Faced with this evidence, Walsh's lawyer advised him to consider making a deal with the prosecutor, but Chen was not interested in plea bargains for such a brutal murder. He wanted Walsh to face the full consequences of what he had done. As Monday evening approached, Chen felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. He was close to solving Ellie's murder and getting justice for her family and friends. But nothing could bring back the kind young teacher who had been killed by a man's twisted anger and obsession. The breakthrough had come, but the hardest part was still ahead. Chen would have to prove in court that David Walsh was a cold-blooded killer who had stalked and murdered an innocent woman because he could not accept that his son needed help with his education. The case against David Walsh was strong, but Chen knew that getting a conviction would require presenting every piece of evidence perfectly. Ellie Weik deserved nothing less than complete justice. 3 days after his arrest, David Walsh sat in the county jail waiting for his lawyer to visit him. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and even his experienced defense attorney was struggling to find a way to help him avoid a murder conviction. Detective Chen had built a perfect case. The physical evidence, witness testimony, and Walsh's own suspicious behavior all pointed to his guilt. But Chen was not satisfied with just arresting Walsh. He wanted to understand why a father's concern about his child's education had turned into cold-blooded murder. On Thursday morning, Walsh's lawyer met with the prosecutor to discuss the charges. District Attorney Margaret Stone was known for being tough on violent criminals. She had prosecuted hundreds of murder cases in her 20-year career and had no sympathy for Walsh. Stone laid out all the evidence against Walsh. The blood evidence, stolen jewelry, threatening text messages, and witness testimony created an unbreakable chain of proof. She offered Walsh one chance to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a life sentence without parole. Walsh's lawyer took the offer back to his client, but Walsh refused to accept it. He insisted he was innocent and demanded a trial. This decision would prove to be a terrible mistake that would only make his punishment worse. The trial of David Walsh began 6 months later in the fall. The courthouse in the county seat was packed every day with people from Millbrook who wanted to see justice for Ellie. Her parents, Tom and Carol Weik, attended every day of the trial, sitting quietly in the front row behind the prosecutor. Michael Torres also came to court each day, though he looked like a broken man. Losing Ellie had destroyed his plans for the future, and he was struggling to rebuild his life without her. Jessica Martinez sat with Ellie's parents, crying often as the details of her friend's murder were presented to the jury. District Attorney Stone presented her case methodically and thoroughly. She started by showing the jury photos of Ellie's classroom and describing what a dedicated teacher she had been. Children from her class, now in 4th grade, wrote letters about how much they missed Miss Weik. Stone then presented the evidence of Walsh's escalating anger toward Ellie. Principal Linda Foster testified about the 2 threatening meetings between Walsh and Ellie. She described how Walsh had been banned from the school because of his aggressive behavior. Patricia Bell took the witness stand and described the heated argument she had witnessed in the school parking lot 3 days before the murder. She told the jury how frightened Ellie had looked and how Walsh had threatened to make her pay. The phone record showed the pattern of harassment that had terrorized Ellie in the weeks before her death. The jury heard about 47 harassing phone calls and read the threatening text messages that had been sent from Walsh's untraceable cell phone. The forensics evidence was devastating. The blood found on Walsh's truck and clothing was proven to match Ellie's DNA. The fibers found in his truck were identical to the carpet in Ellie's bedroom where her body was found. Karen Walsh was the prosecution's most important witness. She testified about her husband's obsession with blaming Ellie for Tommy's school problems. She described how Walsh had been following Ellie around town and talking about her constantly. Karen told the jury about Walsh's strange behavior on the day of the murder. He had come home early from work, taken an unusual shower, and thrown away his work clothes. She described the scratches on his hands and his almost happy mood when he learned about Ellie's death. The stolen jewelry was the final nail in Walsh's coffin. Jessica Martinez and Michael Torres both identified the pieces as belonging to Ellie. There was no possible explanation for how these items ended up hidden in Walsh's garage, except that he had taken them during the murder. Walsh's defense attorney tried to create reasonable doubt by suggesting that someone else could have committed the murder and planted evidence in Walsh's house. But this argument fell apart when the prosecutor pointed out that Walsh's own wife had testified against him. The defense also tried to argue that Walsh's anger toward Ellie was normal parental frustration and did not prove he was capable of murder. But the evidence of stalking, threatening messages, and physical confrontation showed that Walsh's behavior had gone far beyond normal concern for his child. After 3 weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for only 4 hours before reaching their verdict. David Walsh was found guilty of first-degree murder, stalking, burglary, and theft. The judge scheduled the sentencing hearing for 2 weeks later. During that time, Ellie's family and friends prepared victim impact statements to tell the court how her death had affected their lives. Tom and Carol Weik spoke about losing their only daughter and how empty their lives had become without her. Weekly visits and phone calls. They described the wedding that would never happen and the grandchildren they would never have. Michael Torres told the court that losing Ellie had destroyed his faith in the future. He had moved away from Millbrook because everything there reminded him of what he had lost. He struggled with depression and had difficulty trusting people or forming new relationships. Jessica Martinez spoke about losing her best friend and the guilt she felt for not recognizing that Ellie was being stalked and threatened. She wished she had been more supportive when Ellie seemed worried and distracted in the weeks before her death. Principal Foster represented Ellie's school and described how her death had affected the entire educational community. Students, teachers, and parents had all been traumatized by losing someone who cared so deeply about children's welfare. Even some of Walsh's former co-workers testified about the impact of the crime. They said they were shocked to learn that someone they worked with was capable of such violence. The murder had created fear and suspicion in the entire community. When it was time for sentencing, Judge William Harper delivered a harsh but fair punishment. He sentenced David Walsh to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder charge. Additional sentences for the other charges would run concurrently. Judge Harper told Walsh that his crime was particularly heinous because he had killed someone who dedicated her life to helping children, including Walsh's own son. The judge said Walsh's inability to accept that Tommy needed educational help had led him to destroy an innocent life. Walsh showed no emotion as the sentence was read. He was immediately transported to the state penitentiary where he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. His wife Karen divorced him within a year and moved to another state with Tommy to start over. The aftermath of Ellie's murder brought both positive and negative changes to Millbrook. The school district implemented new security procedures and training programs to help teachers deal with aggressive parents. There were panic buttons installed in every classroom and office. A scholarship fund was established in Ellie's memory to help young people who wanted to become teachers. The fund raised over $50,000 in its first year and continued to grow as people remembered Ellie's dedication to education. The animal shelter where Ellie had volunteered also benefited from memorial donations. They used the money to build a new wing and named it the Ellie Weik Memorial Animal Care Center. Her orange cat Rusty was adopted by Jessica Martinez, who said it helped her feel close to her lost friend. Michael Torres eventually moved back to his hometown in another state. He met someone new several years later and slowly began to heal from the trauma of losing Ellie. He kept her engagement ring and sometimes visited her grave on the anniversary of her death. Detective Chen was promoted to police chief 2 years after solving the case. He said that bringing justice for Ellie Weik was the most important work of his career. The case taught him that even small towns were not immune to serious crime, and that careful police work could make the difference between justice and injustice. The murder of Ellie Weik became a cautionary tale about how unchecked anger and blame can lead to tragedy. David Walsh's refusal to accept help for his son's learning problems had escalated into an obsession that cost an innocent woman her life. Teachers throughout the state learned about Ellie's case and became more aware of the warning signs of dangerous parent behavior. School districts developed better protocols for handling threats and protecting their staff members. Karen Walsh and her son Tommy received counseling to help them cope with the trauma of having a husband and father who was a murderer. Tommy was eventually able to get the educational help he needed and went on to graduate from high school and attend community college. The case also highlighted the importance of reporting stalking and threats to police. If Ellie had contacted authorities about the harassing phone calls and text messages, her death might have been prevented. 5 years after the murder, Millbrook had largely returned to its peaceful character. But residents never forgot what happened to Ellie Weik. Her story served as a reminder that good people can be destroyed by others who refuse to take responsibility for their problems. David Walsh remained in prison, showing no remorse for his crime. He filed several appeals that were all rejected by higher courts. He would spend the rest of his life paying for the few minutes of violence that had ended Ellie's promising future.